They are two of the most notorious failures in the Bible. So what could you learn from their example, the example of Judas and Demas? John Macarthur looks at profound lessons from their lives and how you can avoid the same sin on today's Grace to You. Well, if a stranger were to look at your life, your checkbook, your calendar, how you spend your time, what would you say that you loved most? What you love, what you devote yourself to, reveals vital truth about you and your relationship with Christ. John Macarthur, president of the Master's College and Seminary, today shows you how, as he looks at the lives of Judas and Demas, how what they loved and how their failure serves as a sobering warning for all of us. This lesson today is a part of a new study on Grace to You called The Love God Hates. So, how can the ungodly examples of Judas and Demas show you how to think, live, and love? Find out now as John begins today's lesson.
1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away, and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. Here we again have the test of true Christianity. This time, the test is loving or not loving the world. We've had doctrinal tests in this remarkable epistle of John, the test of true understanding of Jesus Christ, the test of a true understanding of one's sinfulness. We've had moral tests, the moral test of obedience, the moral test of loving others. And we come to another test. It fits in again into the moral category or the behavioral category, and that has to do with not loving the world. If anybody loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. That is to say, he has no relationship with God. Judas provides a sort of strange encouragement to me, because even under the Lord of Lords' tutelage and discipleship, there was a defector. There's another New Testament defector that I want to draw your attention to, 2 Timothy chapter 4. The Apostle Paul set a model for ministry that all of us follow, and that is a model to do your ministry in a partnership with a team of faithful men and even women who come alongside to serve. And Paul refers to these people on numerous occasions and even indicates how dependent he is upon them. It is typical for Paul to refer to them in his epistles. Some of them are further identified in the book of Acts. But 2 Timothy 4 has a good list that is representative of Paul's partnership. Verse 10, there is the name of Demas, which sort of heads the list. And then there is Crescens, and then there is Titus, and then there is Luke, and then there's reference to Mark in verse 11, and Tychicus in verse 12. And if you go on down a little further, greet Prisca and Aquila in verse 19, the household of Onesiphorus, Erastus, who remained at Corinth, Trophimus, who left at Miletus. Then there is Eubulus, and there's Pudens, Linus, Claudia, all the brethren. This kind of indicates that there was this group of people that were around Paul throughout his ministry. We're very familiar with that. Well, what makes this chapter particularly unique is this is the last chapter he ever wrote. This is the finale. This is his swan song. This is the end of his life. Soon after this, he was martyred. And he indicates that that's obviously on the horizon. Verse 6 of chapter 4, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. He was a prisoner when he wrote this. The time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. And he's now looking forward to the crown of righteousness laid up for him, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, not only to me, but all those who loved his appearing. So he is really knowing that he's at the end. His ministry is over. He's been faithful to the end. He will soon be executed. This great life, this most noble of all human lives, has come to its end. And from my standpoint, he's my hero. He is absolutely, on the human level, apart from Jesus Christ, my great hero. And he should have gone out with a hero's ending. He should have gone out with an appropriate fanfare. Everybody around him should have given him a tribute that would have exceeded all the people perhaps who've ever lived. The greatest calling that anybody could ever have would be to be an apostle of Jesus Christ. He had that. And of all the apostles, he's the most greatly used apostle because he was used to write at least 13 books of the New Testament. The accumulated power of his life, the power of his message, the breadth and height and length and depth of the contribution he made in the inspired writings that he gave, the spread of the gospel into the Gentile world, which in effect makes him the founder, as it were, of the Gentile church, and all that comes beyond that really flows out of his ministry, should have caused the greatest of accolades to be given to him at the end of his life. Yet at his last hour, the story is, humanly speaking, tragic. It's heartbreaking. If you go back to chapter 1 for a minute of 2 Timothy, Paul is concerned to pass the baton of ministry to young Timothy. He wants to have Timothy take over his ministry. Every pastor who gets to the later years of his life, I can certainly speak for that, becomes very, very conscious of who's going to follow, who is going to pick up the ministry, who's going to take the baton, who's going to receive the mantle to carry on what has been begun. And Timothy, of course, was Paul's choice, but Timothy was struggling seriously. He says to Timothy in verse 6 of chapter 1, kindle afresh the gift of God which is in you, because Timothy was obviously letting his gift fall into disuse. He tells him not to be a coward in verse 7. God hasn't given us a spirit of timidity or a spirit of cowardice. Tells him in verse 8, don't be ashamed of the testimony of the Lord. Don't be ashamed of me as prisoner. Be willing to suffer. It's really an interesting insight into what Timothy was like at this particular time, at the most crucial time in Paul's life, when he wanted to pass the baton, pass the mantle, have Timothy take up the work. Timothy needed to be using his gift. He needed to be strong. He needed to be courageous. He needed to be unashamed and bold for the cause of Christ and of Paul. He needed to be willing to suffer, and in fact, the opposite was true. All of his tendencies were in the other direction. Verse 13, he says, hold on to sound words, which means that Timothy may have been on the brink of even abandoning the truth because it brought so much persecution and so much hostility. Verse 14, he tells him to guard the treasure, which is the Word of God. And then he reminds him in verse 15 of this really remarkable reality. You are aware of the fact